Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Gonzii and today we are going to be reacting to another Lindsay Nikole video called Junkspiracies T-Rex did not have wings. We already checked out the Megalodon one. We have solid proof that he's not alive, sadly. So let's see if T-Rex really had wings or not. So without further ado, let's go, man. Let's get into this. Let's get it.
In the last few years, there's been a growing internet conspiracy that scientists have T-Rex all wrong. Rather than the tiny arms that have been recovered in fossil evidence since the early 1900s, they say T-Rex instead had wings. They came to this conclusion by looking at the skeleton of a T-Rex and comparing it to the skeleton of an ostrich. Pictures, by the way. Pictures of these skeletons. And what started as a popular comment under a
Of course it was on
Reddit has
Reddit.
turned into a genuine belief
That's a
of
cesspool,
thousands,
bruv.
if not millions of people on mostly TikTok, that not only this is true, but scientists have confirmed it, which, spoiler alert, they did not. Not a single scientist has ever said that. This
It is weird,
is
though.
complete
It is
garbage.
If you look at T-Rex, bro, he has this huge head, humongous teeth. He is huge. Everything on him is huge. Bro might even been barking, bro. We don't know yet. But then he has these tiny little arms, bro. It makes no sense.
But I guess I can understand where things went downhill. At first glance, T-Rex's arms are
Yeah.
disrespectful. Pipsqueaks.
It's
They're attached
so
to what's considered one of the
weird.
most successful predators to ever exist, and they just look like useless sticks. I understand the confusion, the dismay, but there are plenty of legitimate explanations for them, and none of them include wings. So today we're going to run through all of this. I'll explain how this conspiracy started, why it's absolutely false, and the real explanations as to why T-Rex had such disrespectful arms. My name is Lindsay Nikole, and this is another
Shout out,
episode of
Lindsay.
Junkspiracies. The T-Rex did not have wings. As always, we're going to get the general information out of the way. T-Rex is badass. Their name, Tyrannosaurus Rex, translates to King of the Tyrant Lizards, which goes harder than any Targaryen name ever in the history of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. And that is a compliment. I love Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. The season finale sucked. I wanted more warfare, but I'll give them a pass this time.
It's not
T-Rex
for me,
belongs
bro.
to a larger group of dinosaurs called theropods, which includes some other well-known dinosaurs you're probably familiar with, like Velociraptor, Spinosaurus, Therizinosaurus, you know, that classic kangaroo stance. This group also includes birds, which I think has created some confusion, but we'll get to that in a bit. T-Rex were not birds in the same way humans are not squirrels, you know, but we'll get to that in a bit. Because T-Rex is the icon that it is, a lot of money has been poured into learning more about them by analyzing the bones.
So
Here's
cool.
a variety of
He's
facts.
so
Some
cool.
are more basic,
The
others
greatest
are more,
animal
you know, like,
to
what
ever
the fuck?
walk
So,
God's
T-Rex was up
green
to 12
earth,
feet
bro.
tall and 40 feet long, which
Oh,
is 4 times the length of my room.
fucked.
That makes me want to
It's
throw up.
ridiculous.
It has 60 serrated teeth, which could each get to 8 inches long. This was
Fucking
definitely
hell.
not a little guy. They were found throughout what is now Western North America, which at the time was an island continent called Laramidia. Research done in 2019 found that T-Rex had one of the best senses of smell out of all dinosaurs.
That makes
we know
sense.
of. Analysis of growth rings in the bones in 2020 found that they had massive growth spurts as teenagers, possibly gaining 35 to 45 pounds per
Damn.
week. Per week. By
Bros
analyzing
in
the
the
relationship
gym.
between population density
Damn,
and
those
body mass in living
gains.
species, scientists in 2021 estimated that at any given time during their existence, there were about 20,000 T-Rex individuals in North America, and somewhere
That's
around
a
2
lot.
billion individuals total
Holy
during their entire
shit.
existence. Some pretty solid stats, if you ask me. And I decided I'm gonna stop there, because I know what you're here for, and I'm here for that as well. A good old-fashioned debunk. So, let's just go straight into the
Let's
origin
go.
of this T-Rex wings conspiracy. Most people have only seen it on TikTok in the last 2 or 3 years. But the earliest instance I could find of it was in a Reddit thread from 6 years ago.
Reddit
It's a reply
sucked.
under r/askreddit. The original question for
Oh,
the thread
shit.
was, which conspiracy theory is so believable that it might be true? A user called Demonic Penguin said, and I'm just gonna read the whole thing. The arms on Tyrannosaurus Rex skeletons are backwards. They ought to be rotated 180 degrees. What good are these stubby little arms for? We have found out relatively recently that T-Rex had feathers. It is now an established fact. T-Rex were not covered in scales, but in feathers, like a bird. Take the arms on a T-Rex and flip them around 180 degrees. You now have wings like an ostrich. Here's an illustration of an ostrich skeleton. See the small arms? Wings. Now look at a Tyrannosaurus. We used to think of almost all dinosaurs as lizard-like. In fact, the name means terrible lizard. Now we know that many different animals that we think of as dinosaurs are more bird-like than lizard-like. XKCD comic below illustrates this nicely. Tyrannosaurus Rex had wings. Not big wings to fly with, but wings that were perhaps something like that of an ostrich, cassowary, or emu, although likely much smaller in proportion to their body. Ostriches use their wings in mating rituals to make themselves appear larger, and to signal and communicate. Perhaps T-Rex used theirs for some similar purpose. They did not have useless, stubby little arms. So, let's just absorb all of that for a second. Right off the bat, this is obvious junk. Where do we even begin? I think I can separate it into 4 main problems to work through. That's what the debunk is going to be, 4 main sections. But before we get into those, I want to make sure we're all on the same page of what this idea has turned into in an existential context. So I want to say in like 2021-ish, I first saw this idea on TikTok.
Recent.
It was this video. It got a shit ton of views, so I debunked it. At the same time, there were a couple other videos going around like that did really well that some of my mutuals debunked. Problem solved? Obviously not. Like every TikTok conspiracy, this was only the beginning. TikTok conspiracies have a very predictable lifespan.
TikTok sucks
evolution,
as well.
if you will.
TikTok
Clickbait
is
channel
shit.
grabs an idea from somewhere else on the internet.
Just
they make
pure
a video
shit,
about it,
bro.
usually trying to pass off the
Insane.
ideas as their own. They throw this sound on it, the one that's playing right now, and boom, the video does well. Other clickbait channels come across this video and remake it, so they can go viral too. Science channels debunk them, and it kind of goes like this in a circle for a few weeks until it disappears out of relevance. Then, 6 months to a year later, the conspiracy reappears. It has been recycled. With a twist. This time, it feels more legitimate. Some people are coming across the conspiracy for a second time. They remember it from the first time it went viral. It's been talked about before, on a massive scale. To the viewer's mind, these ideas have already been around. And I think what happens is, those viral videos from the previous phase get kind of internalized as a legitimacy, because the debunks don't always show up on the same viewers for you page. Usually they don't. So then when the conspiracy comes around a second time, months or a year later, the attitude is, yeah, I've already heard this before, old news, next. And very quickly, this evolves into comments like, scientists have confirmed that this is true, which I swear to God, dude, I get a comment like that every single time I talk about T-Rex. This has even showed up on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Maybe at one point I'd heard that there's one scientist thought those were like remnants of wings,
Oh, that makes sense.
and they weren't actually maybe arms, but they were wings.
Well, that totally makes sense when you think about like ostriches and shit like that they used to have wings and they turned into those things. Let me see it
That's
again.
an old
Let
clip.
me see his fucking little.
That's the
shitty
old
arms.
studio.
That makes way more sense. That makes way more sense. They're the remnants of 4 wings.
We gotta stop there for a second, because this clip has also made its rounds on TikTok. Let's fast forward to that screenshot of the Nat Geo article.
One scientist thought those were like remnants of wings.
That's not what they're saying. Let's go to the original article, talking about the purpose of T-Rex's tiny arms. And it says, and I quote, "Whatever their limited use, the consensus in recent years seemed to be that they were vestigial, hanging around as an evolutionary remnant from T-Rex's ancestors. A little like the wings of flightless birds." So, not saying they're the remnants of wings of flightless birds at all. Saying they're vestigial, so smaller and less significant than they were for their ancestors, because they lost their purpose over time. One thing. And then comparing that to another example of a vestigial trait. A separate one. The wings of flightless
What are
birds.
they for,
Other examples
then?
of vestigial traits.
Because they don't
The
pick up
legs of
food with
boas,
it. They
our
don't
appendix,
fight
the
with
fact that I
it.
can wiggle my ears. The wings of flightless birds are a vestigial trait because flightless birds evolved from flying birds. And so they have wings, but they're not as useful as they were to their ancestors who flew. That's a separate thing. T-Rex did not evolve from flightless birds at all, but we'll get to that in a minute. Was it the best comparison to make for T-Rex arms as a vestigial trait? No, not in this timeline. Maybe the legs of snakes would have been better, but this junk was probably not on Nat Geo's radar. It's pretty obvious that this conversation wasn't necessarily supposed to be taken seriously, and the article got misinterpreted because it was read quickly. I just figured I'd point it out because the clip did go around on TikTok, and that's that. I.e., Joe Rogan fans, do not come for me. I surrender. I don't even know what to say for this. I just not saying anything bad about Joe Rogan. Don't come for me. The point is, this conspiracy has evolved into something that requires this long-form, multi-layered debunk. And I want to make this video before Discovery gets any ideas for any documentary, because it would probably end up having the same impact as the Megalodon one. I don't know why. For some reason, this conspiracy makes sense for a lot of people. Me, personally, not at all. The thought of a massive T-Rex, again, 40 feet long, with tiny little vestigial wings is just grotesque. An image I could easily lose sleep over. Which is why I'm very excited to introduce you to today's sponsor, Helix Sleep, a premium mattress company that delivers customized mattresses.
Get your
right
bag,
to your door.
Lindsay.
We come from a long- Now that we're all on the same page of what this Reddit post has turned into, existentially, let's get into the debunk. Point number 1, the feathers. It is now an established fact. T-Rex were not covered in scales, but in feathers, like a bird. False. The feathers development is far from an established fact. It's actually muddy as fuck. So let's get into it. In recent years, some exceptionally preserved fossils have provided evidence for feathers in multiple different dinosaur groups, most commonly in theropods, which again includes both birds and tyrannosaurs as separate lineages, and some evidence in the tyrannosaurs, but as more primitive feathers, because yeah, the feathers that we're familiar with today didn't just pop into existence. This is considered the most complex structure on the outer layer of any animal that we know of, and they took a really long time to evolve into this that exists on birds today. And as more and more well-preserved fossils have been found, scientists have been able to essentially map what that development looked like. The first stage, as you can see, pretty similar to mammalian fur, and probably served similar functions, like camouflage, insulation. And as they became more elaborate, their functions did too. And now the feathers of birds also generate and help detect sound, form really sick displays for mating and competition, and also help with flight a lot by creating much more lift than drag in the air. But feathers existed way before flight in birds did, and flight developed in many other lineages that don't have feathers at all. So, even though the possible presence of feathers can't be used as a valid argument for T-Rex wings, I want to show you this cladogram anyway, which shows the fossil evidence of feathers in pterosaur and dinosaur subgroups. And then on the right is a more detailed look within the theropods. Aves, all the way at the bottom, is the birds. That's a group birds belong to. As you can see, they got a lot of shit going on. Simple branching feathers all the way to flight feathers. Now, let's look at tyrannosaurs. Extensive patches of scaly skin, monofilaments, which might as well be the fur version of feathers. And anything beyond that is extremely questionable, indicated by the question mark. But absolutely no flight feathers.
So they had
Only
like tiny hairs.
Also, there are other tyrannosaurs.
That makes sense, if you
T-Rex
ask
that this
me.
applies to. There are multiple
That makes
tyrannosaur
sense, bro.
species within the tyrannosaur group. Other than T-Rex, there's diversity.
Also, one thing that I might agree on, I think I saw this somewhere, but I don't recall where. If the Tyrannosaurus lived more to the north, it would make sense to have feathers for insulation, like Utyrannus, for example. That would make sense.
For example, Utyrannus has more extensive evidence of those fur feathers. T-Rex has more extensive evidence of the scales. Maybe juvenile T-Rex had some fur feathers, kind of like how cheetah cubs have long hair on their backs to camouflage. Maybe they didn't. But honestly, it doesn't really fucking matter because it correlates 0% to this argument. So, we're gonna move on. But if you want to learn more about feathers, here's the paper I used for a lot of this section. It was very interesting, I must say. I wasn't expecting to be so captivated by the evolution of feathers. The older I get, the more I realize birds are absolutely sick. But again, for like the third time, feathers are not what make a winged animal. Wings are what make a winged animal.
True.
And what makes a wing depends on the type of animal you're talking about. In this case, a vertebrate, it's the skeletal structure. Like we've talked about in the History of Life series, all vertebrates that live on land evolved from a common ancestor, usually represented as Tiktaalik. This was part of the development of the classic tetrapod form. Tetrapod means 4 legs. Tetra, 4. Pod, legs.
Mono means one, and rail means rare.
Or let's say limbs, 4 limbs. Obviously,
Rail
there have been many
means
developments to the tetrapod shape, to say the least. To name some completely unrelated examples, whales went back to the water, lost their hind limbs, and their 4 limbs evolved into flippers. Snakes lost their limbs altogether. Bats, look at bats, dude. Their wings are wicked, but because of their common ancestry as tetrapods,
That's such
even
a
though groups have
cursed
gone through
image.
insane skeletal modifications, we can still track which bones are equivalent in different groups. And so, we can see what modifications were made for the structure of a wing. So, if T-Rex had wings like an ostrich, you would expect the skeletal structures to truly be the same, and not just by squinting your eyes and looking at the 2 zoomed out pictures of the skeletons, but really comparing the arm bones and seeing that both sets of arms have the same structure, modifications, etc. Let's start with this diagram. In both humans and birds, you can see you have a humerus, radius, and ulna side by side. These are side by side. And then the wrist bones, the carpals, and then the metacarpals, and then finally the phalanges. Yes, despite what you heard from friends, phalanges are real things.
Something's wrong with it. Something is wrong with the left phalange.
And there's a good chance you've got 20 of them. Notice the bird's metacarpals. They're fused. There was a fusion that went on to create a stronger structure for the wing. All birds have fused metacarpals, including ostriches.
That would make sense.
Fused metacarpals. Humans do not have fused metacarpals. Other non-winged tetrapods do not have fused metacarpals. And T-Rex, as you can see from this diagram, did not have fused metacarpals. This is an entirely different structure than that of an ostrich. Another thing that was actually pointed out by Dan Folks on Twitter. Dan has a master's in paleobiology and an entire blog dedicated to scientifically accurate skeletal diagrams of extinct animals. so he obviously knows his shit. People are misinterpreting T-Rex's long shoulder blade as its humerus, that upper arm bone. Seems like that's a major piece of where the confusion is. All right, the next point I want to make is a little jumbled in my head, so stay with me. I'm just gonna try and sort it out. The sentence, now we know that many different animals we think of as dinosaurs are more bird-like than lizard-like,
That image is perfect
upsetting
to
me.
describe that
It
idiot.
means nothing. You can categorize a shit ton of animals as either bird-like or lizard-like. It's like the Booba and Kiki thing. Take mammals, for example, the extended class Mammalia. Some might say a rat is more lizard-like and a kangaroo is more bird-like. That doesn't mean anything. Kangaroos have a bird-like stance, yet they are not birds and did not evolve from birds. They're an entirely different group. That is also the case with T-Rex.
Kangaroos
Does
are
this
so
even make
jacked,
sense?
bro.
Do you know what I'm saying? Whatever,
Thank
just
you.
scratch that. The point I really want to make is about the theropod family tree, bird ancestry, tyrannosaur ancestry. The fact that they are completely separate, and we have millions of years of evidence of that in the fossil record. Let's take a look at this cladogram, which shows how different groups of theropods are related to each other. It shows you not only where the most recent common ancestors are, but also the time period in which they lived. So, here's the tyrannosaur lineage. And then here's the bird lineage, all the way at the bottom, the avian dinosaurs. If we follow those lines of ancestry back, we can see the most recent common ancestor between the two groups was the origin of the group Coelurosauria, about 180 million years ago, as you can see
How
from
do
the
you come up
timeline
with
at the
these
top.
names,
That
though?
means T-Rex and birds share a
Damn.
common ancestor that was alive 180 million years ago. T-Rex first appeared about 68 million years ago. So T-Rex and birds are separated by over 100 million years of evolution. Let me
Thanks.
put that into perspective. We, humans, have about the same amount of separation between us and all marsupials. All mammals, which includes us, whales, squirrels, giraffes, rats,
The rat's like this, like this, like this.
are separated from all marsupials, koalas, kangaroos, Tasmanian tigers, etc. by over 100 million years. Humans are very different from marsupials. To say that we are even remotely the same as a koala would be nuts, right?
Facts.
Do we have a pouch? No. Do we chronically smell like musky piss?
Some of us.
No. And anything studying us 60 million years from now
Some of
wouldn't
us.
expect us to have
Such a
those
good
similarities
meme.
because we're separated by over 100 million years of evolution. It might sound like T-Rex and birds are the same thing because they're both theropods.
That image is
Maybe
cursed.
that group alone sounds small, and maybe looking at them in a cladogram makes it seem like they're pretty closely related to each other. And they are in the general scheme of like all of life on Earth, but not enough. They're not.
It's like this.
And that's that. I also hope this debunks the whole myth that chickens are the closest living relatives of T-Rex. That's a totally separate thing from today, but you know, it's birds as a group, not just chickens. You can't single them out like that.
There's chickens.
Anyway, next point on my list. We know a lot about the evolution of T-Rex, its ancestors, the traits that they possessed, the fact that none of them had wings, etc. In order for T-Rex to have had wings, they must have evolved from ancestors who also had wings, or were on their way to having wings. Pretty straightforward. It's
Makes
one of the
sense.
few occurrences in which nature gives shit to you straight. If an animal has wings, its ancestors must have had wings, or must have been on the evolutionary path to having wings, and that was not the case for T-Rex. Instead, what scientists have noticed is a size change. The earliest tyrannosaurids were smaller, like Dilong and Guanlong. Notice, they had some pretty respectably
What
sized
the
forearms, kind of
fuck?
what you would be more comfortable
What
with
happened?
with a tyrannosaur. But again, they were much smaller than T-Rex, 6.5 feet and 10 feet respectively. And
Oh,
as time went on, species
shit.
within this group generally started to get larger. Their arms, their forelimbs started to proportionally get smaller until you had species like T-Rex. At no point in this development were wings a factor in this equation. And also, this happened in other tyrannosaurid groups to a much more extreme degree that nobody seems to have a problem with. You don't seem to have a problem with a Bailosaurus, dude. Carnotaurus. Explain to me why you have a problem with T-Rex but not this.
Carnotaurus
The point
is even
the
more
trend of
weird, 'cause
larger
they are
body size,
smaller.
small arms happened multiple times. Not just with T-Rex. This was just some weird theropod
The
shit.
arms,
So
I'm
why did
saying.
this happen? What was the real point?
Of course,
of
Carnotaurus
these
is smaller than a
useless,
T-Rex,
stubby little
but, you
arms?
know.
Throughout the years, there have been plenty of ideas. Some of the earlier ideas included holding down prey, getting up from the ground after falling or laying down, which is pretty cute. Maybe to clasp onto their mate when they bang. Maybe to stab competitors or to feed juveniles. These never really held any ground considering their size and
Yeah.
limited mobility. Really, it doesn't make sense to think of them as used for a purpose. They got smaller over time. In a way, one could argue is similar to the loss of limbs in snakes entirely. Some scientists have thought of them as actually useless. One researcher, Gregory S. Paul, said they were not important to their owners, so they should not be important to us. Other papers have talked about the relationship to jaw muscles and arm muscles. With bigger bodies often came much bigger heads, with extremely powerful jaws. A powerful bite needs strong jaw and neck muscles, which need muscle attachments across the shoulders. And arms need muscle attachments there too. So while the jaws got more and more powerful, there had to be a trade-off at the shoulders. Make way for the muscles, and the arms turn into little guys. You might be interested to know that the opposite relationship happened with theropods too, with more powerful arms and smaller heads. Take, for example, Therizinosaurus. Those claws are fucking nuts. Gigantoraptor, heinous. Dinochirus, heinous once again. So the trade-off idea has some pretty solid ground. The author of a more recent paper in 2022 takes this a step further and thinks that maybe getting smaller and smaller just to a lack of use isn't enough to explain this. Maybe T-Rex arms and similar cases of arms got smaller as an advantage, to reduce a safety hazard. There's evidence of group feeding in multiple T-Rex individuals. As the jaws got more powerful, they posed a much larger risk to their pals they like to dine with. A simple accidental bite in the wrong direction could rip an arm off. Boom. Amputation. Boom. Infection. Boom. Death. Smaller arms are nice and tucked in, out of the way. So that could have created a selection pressure for smaller and smaller arms. The possible reasons for these seemingly puny appendages is way more interesting to think about. We're so lucky to have the fossil remains of animals that existed millions and millions of years ago. There are millions, if not billions, if not trillions of species that we will never know about because they just weren't preserved in the fossil record. Think of all the weird prehistoric invertebrates we've talked about on this channel, all the way to the massive predators that dominated the planet, T-Rex included in that. All of what we know is barely scratching the surface of the diversity that existed on this planet for billions of years. Life forms that are probably 10 times more alien than T-Rex or hallucigenia. And yet we're able to uncover some of them and find so many similarities to our own life forms today. And we get to try to piece together what their life was like then using what we know now. And what we realize time and time again is that the reality of our planet is way cooler than our own imaginations. I took your advice. I'm making that a tagline for this series. And if you like this video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.
Lindsay.
Life on Earth.
Shout out, Lindsay. So there you have it. Conclusive evidence that T-Rex did not have wings, bro. And that would not even make sense in the grand scheme of things. So stop saying that. Stop watching those TikToks, bruv. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching the video, man. Shout out to Lindsay once again. She's doing a phenomenal job. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. But before you go, don't forget our videos on this channel, bro. Come on, man. Keep God first as always. Drink water, go tell somebody you love them. And if you're here, you already know what to do, man. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. My name is Gonzii, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.